I'll be over here.
Okay, 1, 2.
Hi, I'm Steve Snyder. I came to Gould Farm in August of 1990, looking for the Burkharts, who are to my right, and I found them. And I've been here ever since.
Wow. I'm Wayne Burkhart. Came in 1984 with my lovely wife, Donna. And we've been with several fits and starts. We've both been employed at Gould Farm ever since. And that's me.
And I'm Donna Burkhart. And we brought our 2 boys in 1984, as Wayne said. And we thought we'd be here for a short time. That we had been working at looking at positions abroad after having been in Zaire, and we thought we might go abroad again. And maybe we'd be here a few years. And we went abroad to New England, and we stayed. And we've never, well, a few times we looked back, but it's been our home, our life, our village, being in Gould Farm. And look forward to retiring in the town of Monterey and still being a part of this incredible endeavor.
I'm Bob Rausch, and I came to Gould Farm in September of 1978. I found out about Gould Farm, and I was working at a little school in Claverack, New York, called the Open Community School. And somebody told me about Gould Farm and the outdoor work there, and I was not getting tired of teaching in the classroom, so it worked out, and I came. And prior to that, I was 31 when I came to the farm. I was at jobs that were pretty temporary by their very nature, like Nature's Classroom and camps and things of that nature. So I'd had no idea, I didn't even think about how long I would be there, but turns out it's been I think just 38 years now, as September 5th.
It's a temporary job.
Temporary job, yeah.
That's a long temporary. I'm Bob Gardiner. Most of my life at Gould Farm, but I arrived here in June of 1943, left in September of 1943, came back in November of 43, and stayed here until I graduated from college in 1954. When I came to the 100th anniversary dinner, I said, I'm here because I have to say thank you. I have a number of things to say thank you, but I limited myself to 3 that night. First of all, Gould Farm healed my mother. After 3 years as a working guest, she became the chief cook of Gould Farm for the next 8 years. That was number 1. Number 2, I learned, without even knowing I was learning it, that the best way to live is to help other people find their goodness and build their lives around that. And it took me about 30 years to figure out that that was a good idea, and I've tried to do it ever since. And the third thing, most important of all, this was in 1947, a young woman came to Gould Farm from Lexington, Massachusetts. Roma thought I took a shine to her. She was absolutely right. It took me 10 years to figure out how important that shine was, but we lived together for 51 years. Mm-hmm. So here I am, back at Gould Farm where my heart belongs.
Somebody better say who Roma was.
Well, I hope it'll come up in the conversation. Roma was a young woman. I don't know when she came to Gould Farm. I know she died.
1930,
What's that?
1930.
1930.
Harriet told me.
Yep, she was, and she took me under her wing. She took me down to the garden. She took a lot of people who needed to be under somebody's wing. She did the same thing with my mother. My mother would do something that the cook didn't like, and she would come screaming out of the kitchen calling, "Roma, Roma," and Roma would say, "Come on, Al, let's go sit outside." And whether the conversation was 15 minutes or 2 hours, my mother went back to the kitchen ready to go back to work and live again. And she was that way with a lot of people. First day I was here, said, "Okay," I was a city kid. She said, "Okay, pull up the weeds." How do I know what the weeds are? "Oh, they're the ones that grow in a straight line." "Oh, okay. I can't do that." "Why not?" "I'll get my hands dirty." "We will cure you of that very quickly." And they did. Roma was a dear, dear person.
I can remember Roma keeping everybody in a straight line and just really informing us in no uncertain terms that at Gould Farm we don't sit on the tables, or that it was not acceptable to go in your bare feet through the dining room. You had to be properly shod to go through the dining room. And she had her very soft side as well, that could really answer to the pain that people were feeling, and at the same time, knowing that it took backbone to really be a part of what was expected in the world. So she mixed that hardcore disciplinary stuff with a very soft heart, and did that right up until the very, very end. And she died at Gould Farm just short of 100 years.
Just remember?
Yeah, in the room, which is now the admissions office. So she was there for 100 years, and then, or for most of her 100 years. And then after she was gone, I set up admissions office in that room. And so that's the room in which I greet people who are first coming to the farm. And sometimes I told Liz Ann once, our executive director, I said, if you come in some morning and you find me leaned back in a recliner that I have in that office, you'll know that I've moved in, because the current admissions office was the room where Roma lived for many years. Harriet lived in that room. It was a bedroom for the elder women in the community for many years. And so I warned her, I'm getting a little older. If you come in some morning and I'm in that recliner, you'll know I've moved in and become one of the elder matriarchs at the farm.
That is one thing I think that is, so change is constant for all of us, and certainly at the farm it goes on all the time. A lot of things are new, and then people ask about the farm and they say, well, there's a lot of new things, and then if you came and spent some time again, you'd see that we retain a lot of things that most of us knew when we first came. But the retirees, Roma was just one, but when I came, there was Harriet, of course, and then Marta, and George Norian. And now we don't really have retirees at the farms. And well, there was Lowell's mom as well.
Did you know Ethel? Did you ever know Ethel?
I never knew Ethel, but the thing was interesting is some of those folks had ties to the Gould family, so to speak, because not back to Will Gould's time, but certainly back to Mrs. Gould's time. And that entourage, that original entourage. So even when I came in as recently as 25 years ago, I was with these folks that harken right back to their kind of that inner circle of Gould Farm pioneers or the starters, and I think we've kind of lost all those folks now.
Yeah.
Nobody's,
I sometimes say that those of us who are older and reaching the age of retirement are like the banks of a river. And we sort of hold some of the fast-flowing water. There's always the banks to the river. But the fresh-flowing water are the guests who come in, and the young interns, and the young families, and the young energy that comes in. And it takes the banks to hold that rushing water. But the rushing water shapes the banks. Thank goodness. That keeps us from becoming too rigid, too staid in our ways. And we chafe at change. We often chafe at change, but it's so essential to what we do to be able to change and to be organic, truly organic in what we offer to our guests who are there.
I knew Miss Eleanor Goodyear, and she was one of the originals, the only one in 1978 that was left. She came in 1913, and she died in 1980. And she would tell stories, because I was a house parent in Main House, and I would go in there and give her some medicine every night, 5 nights a week, and she would tell me about stories, how she would, as a young, having arrived at Gould Farm, Will Gould gave her the job of going up and watching the cows in the pasture, and she described it as up towards Sunset Rock. It must have been young forest coming up there. Now it's all big trees, fairly big trees. And she told me about seances they had from time to time in places, things of that nature. That was something of the vogue back then in the early 1900s.
I never heard about the seances.
Well, she told me they had some seances.
Harriet used to talk about that.
Now, which good year was that?
Miss Eleanor.
That was Miss Eleanor.
Yeah.
Miss Caroline was gone.
Yes, she was, I didn't know her. Of course, there's Faith Colt, who died in 1985. And she used to take care of all the stuff in the dining room that Roma later took over. You knew Faith Colt
Of course.
for a year or so.
And now we live in her house. We were only the second people after the Colts. We were the first to move into that house. They had built it when Faith and her husband came.
The little lady with a pencil behind her ear. And she would, there was a tradition back then, we had napkin ring meals every night where people sat at places that were assigned to them. And she, Faith Colt would go around and distribute food. She would keep her eye on the table. I don't know if you remember that, if she was still doing that or not.
Yeah, she
And then
was.
she would take food from one table that had a lot of meatloaf, another table had none, and she'd go around and distribute it evenly.
I often wondered about the Colts, but it wasn't just the Colts who seemed to privately build a house at Gould Farm, and there seemed to be a real accepted custom of private individuals building their house at Gould Farm when they were connected with the farm, and then knowing that that would be ceded to the farm. And the Colts were sort of the most remarkable family, I guess. Built a substantial house in the mid to late 20s, and lived there through the rearing of 2 sons, one of whom died of suicide, and the other son, of course, left home, became a lawyer, and is still connected with Gould Farm, David Colt. And just to see that, how the families stayed or weaned themselves from Gould Farm but stayed active. There were others too, and I don't have to mention those, but several, 3 or 4 of the other buildings, substantial buildings that had residences at the farm were built by people who either lived entirely or some of the year at Gould Farm.
We talk a lot about history and the people who formed the base of the community, and all of us here are staff. But again, I think that the true nature of what Gould Farm is, and as an art form, in the Berkshires we have all the arts. We have music and drama, and we're wonderful in the arts, writing, and however, Gould Farm, I think, is the prime example of the art of community in the truest sense. And we have been so supported by the Berkshires and feel so proud of that, both by the town of Monterey and then the broader Berkshires. And I think that it is the guests who come and who challenge us to constantly be changing and opening ourselves to new ideas that is so important. And in my other life, before I became, worked in administration at Gould Farm, I thought I would be an English teacher, and I did for some years, and I like to write poetry. So every once in a while, I'm going to share my story through poems, a poem that I've done through the years, because that's sort of been my link as I sit behind a desk in office style. So this was for Ruthie, who was a lovely young woman from California who came and couldn't get out of the car the first time she came. But she came back, and her mother worked with it, and then she came to love the farm, to work in the harvest barn, and love Gould farmers, everyone's, and she gave us so much in her life there at the farm. After she had gone and was living in a community supported kind of situation, very happily, but she had a physical ailment that took her life, like a heart attack kind of thing. And her mother from California wanted her to be buried at Gould Farm, and they came and had a memorial service there, and she has a beautiful stone that's on Diane's Trail. And but I wrote this poem for her, and so often it's staff who form the basis, but it's the guests who bring us so much. So this is for Ruthie. Ruthie, now you are a hummingbird, jeweled and swift. You are a butterfly, tumbling and light. You are the earth, open and sweet. You are the sun, blazing and sure. You are the rain, touching our skin. You are our laughter, the wind in the leaves. You are our heartbeats. You already are all the years you still might have lived. You are our tears. You are enough, just as you are, perfect, complete. A mitzvah, a gift. This bundle called Ruthie, our hearts will hold gently. You are never alone, free, light as a feather, yet always at home. And we love that, knowing that each guest who comes is essential to the creation of the community that is Gould Farm.
One thing remarkable about Gould Farm is that as an organization, it has held remarkably true to its purpose from the beginning. We've had so many changes in the way we treat mental illness and dislocation, the woes of life, and now we call it more mental illness than anything else. But it is a whole mystery of how we tune ourselves to life or get disenfranchised from life. And I've seen so many people coming to Gould Farm who have the the rebirth, the reintegration of their selves, and even a discovery of a new life. Examples of old, I have to mention Lowell McIntosh, who was an exploring immigrant from Luxembourg, and arrived via New York, and stewardess on DC-3s, and matron on Park Avenue, and so on. Her life crumbled, and she was a guest at Gould Farm, and found through very elemental sorts of work that her interest in life was rekindled, and she was very intellectually curious, and she had a long association with Gould Farm then after as a staff person, and was at Gould Farm until she died. We have much more recent examples too of people who had the Gould Farm treatment. And I guess what I want to emphasize as a part of our discussion is that those of us who came, I think, had a little piece of the vision, the goal, the desire that drew Will and Agnes Gould and their entourage here in the first place. We can talk about the times, and I would like to, but the main thing that interested me in Gould Farm after quite an initial career after college in developing my home farm in a small community, quite a bit like Monterey, and having left that and spending a little bit of time overseas and studying the development of communities and so on. After all that, I said, well, this is a kind of a job that appeals to me, and I'm sure that it was just the yearning to not just to be of service, but to find my identity close to the land, with some element of service, serving people, and having a hand in a way of life that showed a complete cycle. We have specialists. David Colt, whom I mentioned, was a specialist and left Gould Farm, did not work as a staff member at Gould Farm. We need a lot of specialists, but we also can sometimes find our life fulfillment and a means of service for the guests that we're talking about by joining this kind of a special community which exists to serve, and not as a community in itself, and which also exists to be a part of the larger community, and that was very important to me too. So when I came, I joined Regional Planning Commission and town government and this kind of thing. We are all a part of that, and it blended well.
Can you tell the story of the taking one of your calves up to the hospital? It's one of my favorites.
Okay, well that was in a very team-oriented service of a guest whom we had come to admire, a guest who worked in the farm department and who was rehospitalized in the Jones department at Berkshire Medical Center. Gould Farm therapists follow people and talk with the therapists at Berkshire Medical, and the chief of psychiatry was Phil Prima, and so our therapist got us farmers together, and we took a calf to a meeting that was held to essentially get our guests ready to come back to the farm. So a planning meeting, where is your future, how long will you be at the hospital, and so on. And this guest wanted very much to stay apart. The animals were very important to her to her well-being. And so we took a young female calf, who later became a cow in the Gould Farm herd, in a van up to the hospital with the conspiracy of Dr. Prima, the chief of psychiatry. And we went up the elevator into the room. The calf was with us through a half-hour meeting. Didn't make any messes. And we were on the way down, and a housekeeper saw us with the calf walking out, almost blessedly, almost out the door. Said, "You can't do that."
Too late.
And we said, well, we're on our way out, and this calf has been helpful to our guest. That was that. But it showed the blending of all the influences that we think can really help people rediscover their will to live, their place in life.
It's quite a new type of therapy.
Well, in the old days, Roma talks about the days in which Mrs. Colt and Mrs. Gould would do theory therapy. A guest would be having a hard time, and Mrs. Gould would say, "Well then, dearie," and suggest what should happen next. And she said we called it theory therapy. So it started out with doing something a little different than that prescribed in the books.
You want to talk a little bit about what you did, or
One of the things that astonished me when I came back for that 100th anniversary was to realize, to be in the midst of a community that was as strong and as healing and as healthy as the community I grew up in. I knew Gould Farm had retained that core, that powerful community. There was more formal structure than there was when I lived here. But that the core, the heart of this community had been passed on and was being sustained by you folks, as it was when I arrived. I couldn't tell you how it happened, but I promise you it was as real as my taking my next breath.
And you could find it.
I have stayed in touch ever since.
Well, you asked about what we do. So there as well, I think there's been a historical evolution at the farm in the sense that it was what you mentioned about it's maybe more formal in some ways in recent times than what you remembered. And I think in more of the old days, that was probably the case, that most people came to the farm for their own personal reasons. When you hear the stories through the McKees and how they got there and what they did, people kind of showed up and then just brought whoever they were as individuals with their needs and their resources and kind of plugged in a common sense, helping out, fitting into the community as was needed. And I don't think there were so many professionals in those days as now. It's more the case, certainly with the clinical department, it's more the case that people are there by some professional degree to practice as things are currently defined, but still that yeah, that still goes on. There are probably a lot of us that, well, just us that are sitting at the table, we're probably in that category of people that showed up with whatever skills that we have, and then we just end up applying those to the work at hand, and it kind of evolves as years go by, and you move into things as the need is. So personally, I work in the work program as a work leader primarily, and working along with the guests to do our department, forestry and grounds as we call it. But even that's evolved. Wayne used to be in charge of
Gardens and grounds.
gardens and grounds when I first came, and Donna was head of doing the rotators. You used to schedule the rotators. Remember that? And I was a rotator. That means you did whatever you went to whatever department needed the help during that week.
I want to know who's in charge of catching the cows.
It depends on who gets called.
There was a cow loose recently. She was in the middle of 23.
You sure it was ours?
Yes. Yes. Yeah. Well, we have a farm team, and we have an animal manager who is doing a great job, and I'm the agricultural director, who I guess is ultimately responsible for that cow in the middle of the road. And we usually find out when there's a cow loose. And often it's the police that tell us, and so we try to think up excuses about why this happened this time, and it doesn't happen so often as it would seem. But we are, we have people in charge of most everything. What I have come to appreciate and really hold forth, sometimes even too strongly maybe, about the Gould Farm program is that I think that our program and our activity, which is directed at getting people to work, has to be an integral part of the management of our organization. And when that gets too far afield, then I think we lose some of our effectiveness, because the dynamism of having our clients, our guests, participate in all the operations that we do, whether it's food service, whether it's farming, whether it's forestry, whatever we are doing, the more we can draw our clients into that activity by means of the staff doing that activity, the more we will awaken continuing interest and development and rehabilitation, which is a word we use a lot, and that's a part of bringing people back to the excitement, the boredom, and the real life activity of a job, of a task to do every day.
I often think that it's part of what makes Gould Farm an art and makes us effective is that every day we are building community with our hands, with what we do, whether it's cooking the food, growing in the vegetable garden, milking the cows, making cheese, chopping wood, shoveling snow. We are creating the community every single day, and we could not do it as a staff without the guests. The guests are just as important to creation of community as we are, and often a lot more. And so it's that makes it a real place, that it's not just a program or an institution, but it's the creation of something beautiful in the beautiful Berkshires. Steve, you can talk about the many times you've been in the town of Monterey sweeping up snow after sweeping up sand after the winter.
Bob's favorite job.
Yeah, like Don Amstead, right? He was the head of the road crew. And, well, that was a period of a number of years we did that in the 80s. Until Don retired. We would help for maybe a week or sometimes longer, cleaning up the center of town from Sandersfield Road all the way to the fire station.
Well, I guess we were just saying before we got started, trying to count all the people in South County that had worked at the farm, and so to some of us that's almost a blurred boundary, Gould Farm and the local community, because we're so integrated with the community, and for the farm having been there, so the Goulds having come over 100 years ago, and you think of all the people that in the community that have history at Gould Farm, and vice versa. It gets almost hard sometimes in my mind to separate out the two. Didn't you go to Avalon School?
I went to Avalon School from November until the end of my first year, end of 5th grade.
And a lot of the other
By the way,
kids currently have gone to the
That
local.
school was ahead of the Boston Elementary School I went in half of the subjects I was taking. And then the rest of the time I went to center school, where I had my first great teacher, Emma Heath. She was, every student in that room was an individual to her. And
Was that Heath's of the same Heath as Bob Heath, or a different family?
she was the aunt of Ken Heath and Ernie Heath.
Yeah, okay, that
Yeah.
was the same family.
Yeah, same family.
Yeah.
Oh, yeah.
Monterey and Gould Farm, it has been a complicated relationship, though, over the years. Many of the people not involved in Gould Farm in the town have not necessarily understood or seen the world the way people at Gould Farm have. And many people at Gould Farm, especially if they came from other regions, were quite isolated, quite insulated, and that is something that continues to be a temptation when you're a part of a strong community like Gould Farm. Sometimes you don't integrate as well as you might. The fact that we are working with a population of people who are mentally ill has caused quite a bit of estrangement over the years from some people who have not understood that the mentally ill are so much more like us than we would ever guess. So that's in a more special way than educational institutions, which have a lot of their own bureaucracy, are looked askance at by town many times, government. How do you meld a strong community and organization which has its own identity with a larger town? So that's been very interesting, and I think many times that divide has been crossed successfully. But it takes a lot of work and talent and a lot of dedication by both townspeople not associated with the organization, and then Gould Farm people themselves. Crossing the divide, that's one thing we try to maintain.
How much do you think that roadside and harvest barn are a way to connect?
They're invaluable. They're invaluable as a contact point. I talked with one person who should have been with us tonight, who was saying, I think the roadside store has outlived its usefulness. And I said, I cannot agree. This is still, no matter that it doesn't make any money, no matter this, no matter that, it is a point of interface, and we need all the points of interface that we can get. So yes, I think they are very important. These kinds of institutions that have as their goal an interconnection with the wider town.
It would be a huge loss for our town to not have the roadside, which is so important, you know, for so many people in the town to have an opportunity to go out for breakfast or lunch. And Harvest Farm, which just keeps making the most amazing baked goods. What would this town be like if we didn't have that?
And then, you know, little ways, the CSA, and increasingly, I think it's changed through the decades, where, you know, people now come out and pet the little calves and bring their children, and they know it's a welcoming place in general. It's not a place to be afraid at all. And townspeople have been so courteous and respectful in making sure that they're not intrusive, but at the same time, you know, it's a very open environment, and that's important for our guests too. And I think that church, little UCC church here in Monterey, the library, we do a weekly trip here to the library every week, and you know, all our guests are so glad to be able to resource. We have had art shows here that have just been delightful, and coffee houses in the church where we open it up and people join us, and so all of those kinds of things. We're an integrated part.
There's another link between Gould Farm and the community, which I'd like Bob to talk about.
Yes, I was going to try to get that in.
Yeah, okay, your turn.
It's Diane's Trail, and this memory of my wife Diane, who died of cancer in 1992, and she was very much part of the farm. Even though she didn't accept any money for her volunteer services as a nurse, she took over for Nancy Smith whenever Nancy went on vacation. Diane was a registered nurse, and she worked in the community, like, for example, at the Lee V&A, and she also worked at D. James, the bakery, the corn crib. She did some gardening, but basically her work was working as a nurse, 80% of the time. She came from New York up here in 1982, and she died in 1992. And after she died, my good friend John Green, Greenejon, first name, suggested this trail, which everyone now knows. It's like an institution in the town, so to speak. And John and Kathy and their 3 children, was it 4 children? 3 children. They lived at Gould Farm in the 80s, and so they got to know Diane and I. And John is, I couldn't have done the trail without him, because he knew how to build these bridges and everything. And that's a story too. The whole saga of building this trail and all these bridges, and the story of how a timber fell on John. The trail, by the way, we started working on it, putting in the footings in the spring of 1994, and then we had a dedication of Diane, the first leg of Diane's Trail, including Diane's Bridge, on June 17th, 1995. And then we did the second leg of it, the return loop, in 1998. But what happened one time was I was there, this timber fell on John's neck and he didn't get hurt. And we ascribed that to Diane's spirit. You know, it was one of those
Almost
things.
a seance, huh?
Well, you could say that, but...
Well, it didn't protect me when I was walking with my grandson, and I said, "Weetaboo, be careful, you'll fall in the..." It was right by Diane's Bridge, "You're gonna fall in." And just then I went over the side of the bank and I tried to rescue myself and scrambled and broke my ankle.
Well, that was because it was the confluence, not really part of the trail.
That's true. I wandered off on the confluence.
And So the trail has been used and worked upon, maintained by many, many people. It's had an influence on a lot of lives. And so that is another way that the community knows about Gould Farm. And that's what I wanted to mention also. When I first came to Gould Farm, I was drawn to most places. I've had a love for my hometown in Cumberland, Rhode Island, the woods and everything. My father took me out all the time fishing, hiking, and so I got to know the trees. And then the region, first thing I did was get topo maps and would go hiking and took people on hikes at the farm a lot and explored the history of the old house foundations, the charcoal sites, and old wells, and that just meant so much to me. In addition to the history of Gould Farm, you know, I read there's 2 history books on Gould Farm, and so that whole sense of history, both of Gould Farm and then it went back even further, has always meant a lot to me. I dug around many house foundations in the Berkshires, just scraping around, looking for things.
Have any Bob Terriot stories?
Well, Bob Terriot, we can all talk, most of us can talk about Bob and his height and driving around a little Volkswagen. And I remember first meeting them, what was his wife's name? Peggy, I think, right? They came in 1979 and moved to Wellman Road. And I'd only been in a year, and I'd be hiking around and would meet Bob. And he loved the land and was very much part of the land trust. And so there's a lot of land in Monterey and maybe elsewhere that's been set aside because of Bob Terriot.
Bob loaned us his VW engine sawmill, mobile manufacturing sawmill, that he used a lot to saw wood at his place. I pressed him hard, and finally he loaned it to Gould Farm at the time that we were building a sheep barn after the 1995 tornado. And that's another story. But we needed longer wood for the rafters of the sheep barn. And so we said, well, Bob, if you would buy the extension for the sawmill, then we could have it. He said, well, I'll donate it to Gould Farm. And then our director said, oh, but we have to make sure. The director was Brian Snyder at that point, a young man who had his own sense of who was who and who was going to do what. And so he said, okay, we'll accept that donation, but remember, that's Gould Farm's part of the sawmill, and he cannot have it back. Well, Bob Terriot got that piece back when he took the saw back. I don't know whether our director knew it or not, but that piece was not worth anything to us without the mill. And Bob got his donation.
I think Bob Terriot sawed some of the wood for the Diane's Bridge too, or he donated the hemlock or something.
Could be.
Yes.
Likely.
Is any of his property part of Gould Farm now, or?
It's continuous with it. You know, it's part of, it's right next to Diane's Trail.
No, he did not cede any, will any, or give any of his land to Gould Farm.
But I think he gave a donation after there was this, for a grant, for some money to help maintain the Diane's Trail.
Can you farm any of his land?
Yeah, we have not officially. I don't think we've even pastured, but there's been talk of it over time. Farming the land was something I wanted to mention a little bit. When Will Gould came in the great panorama of history, the land around Monterey was not going for much, and that's of course one reason he was able to buy. And he was very much of an investor, and he bought a lot of properties around the town of Monterey, many of which have been sold back to other people again. But at that time, land was growing shut, and he joined a diminishing number of farms in Monterey. And Gould Farm has continued to be, fortunately or otherwise, one of the primary agricultural operations at Gould Farm in Monterey at this point. And we have helped keep a lot of land open so that as we could with the Terriot land, as we have helped with the Sheffy land. A prime example of cooperation with farmers in Monterey is what Gould Farm and Sheldon Fenn have done together. The legacy of Sheldon Fenn is, of course, quite famous in its own right. For a time, Gould Farm was not able to maintain the dairy herd and the processing of milk, which became so important, at least by the 30s or 40s, for Gould Farm use. So Sheldon Fenn, who had his own dairy herd, brought his herd to Gould Farm for a while in, I think it was the 60s. We subsequently had our own dairy herd. Sheldon Fenn and his Woodburn farms subsequently retired, and as he was not able to work the land, Gould Farm took over the working of the land and had a wonderful sense of cooperation with him. And then in his will, he created a small trust, which to this day has livestock and has trustees who are out of the goodness of their hearts and out of the goodness of our hearts at Gould Farm, keeping this little operation, another farm and some more land open. We have a state APR restriction, agricultural preservation restriction, on some of Gould Farm land and some of the trust land at Sheldon Fenn's farm too. So this has been important, as has our cooperation with one of the last quite active farms, the lowland farm of the Tryons. There's other agriculture, and we hope there would be more, but increasingly Gould Farm, as somebody has already mentioned, is a wonderful place to see farm life, since we still have a diversified farm with multiple species of livestock and with fields tended and so on. And so that is another contribution that we feel that we can make to the community and are making.
Yeah.
Is it a huge loss about the chicken barn, the chickens? Many of us in town could be just as devastated as you all are.
But it showed it was devastating to the farmers who that was a part of the work of the farm, and for our guests and staff alike. Fire is always devastating. And this one sprang from electrical wiring, and it just went up so quickly. It was dry. But what was so powerful was how we processed that together in the community. We're not immune from all the things that happen in the community. Real things happen. Fires happen. Death happens sometimes. Disappointing. children struggle and teenagers struggle and all these things. We're not protected from that, but we band together to share and help each other through those times. Bob mentioned his wife Diane. We lost our son Christopher. Sad, hard things happen. But through the process of community and true support, our guests, who struggle more than the rest of us, can learn to be strong and how to handle their vulnerabilities. So it's that underlay of kindness, courtesy, and respect that Will Gould came with and that we hang on to as the basis for everything we do, underlying all the clinical things that, and sometimes, staff don't always get along. I had an argument today with Steve about clearing brush. Do we clear brush or do we not clear
Who
brush?
won?
Right, Steve?
Who won?
Neither of us won. I still want to take a weed whacker and take it down. And he says, we got to bring it to the landscaping committee because some people don't want the brush down. So anyway, it's a real place and we struggle with real issues. And it's the way we struggle with them. And look for common ground, look for resolution, and that's what helps our guests in the context of good psychiatric and state-of-the-art care. So I was just going to do one more poem if I can and then I'll turn it over to others. But this is one that I wrote for a board meeting. It's called Presence. This week I got a letter from a former guest whose name I had forgotten. It's been 30 years and many guests. His face surfaced slowly. Robert is still present. He wrote, "It has been a long time since I have been at Gould Farm, but I am always reminded of its presence in my life." Gould Farm's presence in our lives. A place, yes, 700 acres. A Berkshire village, gardens, fields, and woodlands. Quiet places where ashes rest. Stone memorials, a sukkah. A new child born on Monday, for whom this is all simply home. A place, yes, and so much more. A vitality, a presence in the world, a healing presence beyond place, but linked to place in countless human lives. And each of us is a presence in the vitality that is Gould Farm. Will and Agnes are a presence in my life, although I never spoke with either one of them. Rose, Faith, Roma, Harriet, Sally, Nancy, BJ, Cindy, Zach, Philip, Stephen, Lizanne, Kathy, Katie, Simon, Wayne. I had to get my husband in there. Gregory, Chris. Guests, children, refugees, all those we love who haven't touched the place but have been touched by Gould Farm's presence in the world. Our common links across 100 years creates an endless presence. So with fresh tenderness, I simply say, Bill Kubin, who has set me straight from time to time, Kent, who brought my family here, Larry, Ellen, Betsy, Stewart, I treasure your ongoing presence in my life. I treasure being present with you now and in the vitality that always will be Gould Farm.
What's the date on that poem?
That was October 2015. Weren't you at that board meeting?
It's very nice. It's
Shame
very
on you.
recent. No, I was there. Now I remember. Yeah, that's right.
One of the things that strikes me about Gould Farm today is the children. When I came in 1943, I was the youngest child here. Through all my time in school in Monterey and then at Searles High School in Great Barrington, I was the only, careful Bob, maybe 1 year, Storrs Olds and Gail Jager went to Searles High School with me. Otherwise, I was the only student from Gould Farm going to school. Now, there are lots of children at Gould Farm, and it is one of the important ways Gould Farm is the healthiest place I have ever lived. Those
Oh,
children
blessing.
are so lucky. They don't know any more than I knew when I was here, how lucky I was. But Gould Farm is it's going to be with them for the rest of their lives. They're going to carry it with them,
I have
just as I have.
a really funny story. I was thinking about it, that you were a child here, and then my little Shaylin and Jordan Loader, one Sunday afternoon, they were off doing their thing. They owned these 700 acres, the woods, the gravel pit.
Yeah.
They would roam, and those two in particular would get into all sorts of things. So one time, Kent Smith is in his office on a Sunday, late Sunday afternoon, Sunday evening, and the chief of police, and I don't even know who it was in Monterey at that time, drives up behind Main House, gets out of the car and asks for Kent Smith. So they call Kent Smith, and he comes in and he says, "There's two children sliding down the sand in the gravel pit, and they're stark naked." They didn't want to come home with sand in their pants, so they took all their clothes off and were having a great time in the gravel pit. So children, yes, they grow up here, it's home to them. And when they go up to a guest and grab them around the legs and say, "Hey, play tag with me," the Rundle children now,
Yeah.
or, you know, our therapist kids and so on, they just, you know, they don't see the illness, they see the human being.
Yeah.
And if that guest is a bit uncomfortable with the child approaching them so directly, the parents are there to make it a learning experience, a comfortable experience. So, but most of the time it's just, they love it. So,
Can you talk a little bit about Gidge O'Connell and what her house?
Steve, you want to?
Well, Bob knows Jidge better than I do, but yeah, Jidge, when did Jidge come to Monterey? I forget.
Oh, I think in the early 60s with her family, and her husband and
Six
five
daughters?
daughters or
Five?
6 daughters.
I can't remember, yeah.
And she used to be a school teacher.
Yeah, she was Shay's first grade
Used to
teacher.
come into the roadside store, and buy things. And she was a board member, she was on committees to help get the Orchard House built. And then she moved, after her husband died, she lived alone basically, and was very much part of the farm. She'd be there a lot. She was involved with the farm as a board member and associate
Neighbor.
and neighbor, yeah, and then about 3 years ago, 2.5, 3 years ago, she moved to Providence, Rhode Island to be, sort of like an assisted living, to be with her, near her daughter, one of her daughters. And then her house was bought by the farm about 1.5, 2 years ago now. And it's like a stepping stone house for guests to live there, and they get jobs and volunteer work, and they participate in the life of the farm to a degree too. So the Gould Farm bought the house that Gidge O'Connell lived in, and it's part of Gould Farm now.
The transition house?
The second transition house,
And we told her she could stay there anytime she comes back.
yeah. She was back not too long ago.
Yeah.
She was for the library. She came to the meeting for the plans to build the library. She was at that, to add on to it.
Actually, I think she's more comfortable actually staying in our visitor room, and she stayed in our visitor room. The bathroom's closer. So,
And what are the plans for the future? Anybody? Wings?
Lots of plans. How detailed of plans do you want? We're gonna take over the world.
Good, we need you. Wayne, you're the person who has all the planning experience.
Well, We don't see major things happening in the future. We have a capital campaign starting that is going to build a long-needed community center for larger gatherings, for some activities, for recreational activities.
So we don't have to do yoga on the living room
And,
floor.
yeah, it's being called the new Red Barn. There was a barn which was mostly for storage, but was quite a characteristic part of the architecture of the upper farm. So there's a capital campaign just starting to raise money to provide a needed facility there. There's always a question about how we use the big old main house, and there's not much of a sense for not using that, but refurbishing it. It needs refurbishing, and so that is another project that might be done. There are no vast plans for expansion. That would get into a lot of things around what is the right size for a Gould Farm and so on. And we haven't felt that major expansion is important. One other thing that has been since the Harvest Barn and Orchard House, just to pass over them quickly, those were our latest big projects. Now another big project that is just finishing is a heating plant for the lower campus, and that is only possible thanks to a grant from the Department of Energy Resources of the state of Massachusetts. And it's a part of a pilot program of using wood chips, a much more local form of the pellets that people are starting to use more, trying to utilize local resources to take the place of a lot of the fossil fuels that come from around the world. And so these are some of the projects, and of course we were mentioning the loss of the chicken house, and we hope to rebuild that, but we still have to process through the organization how that financing and how that working in might go and what size it would be. Gould Farm is a very dynamic but very what would you call it? An organization that has to work carefully to maintain a balance. So whenever one thing is changed, we only do it with great planning and with a certain amount of fearful look, because it is such a complicated place, sociologically, physically, and financially.
Well said.
I don't think we talked much about the Boston program, did we?
No.
Because I think it started in 1977 or early 78 with a place called Farrington House in Lincoln. And then it was the idea of Kent Smith, I believe, and then it grew to as many as, I think, 4 places at one time.
Yeah, some apartments.
Apartments,
Yeah.
apartments, and now Gould Farm has one place in Medford called Fellside, which can house 12 people, 10 people, and it's got good, there's good transportation there for people that don't necessarily need a car. And so that's been part of Gould Farm now for close to 40 years, having a program in Boston.
And then out of that, where a lot of our folks were not wanting to move to the city for even a period of time before often going back to California or Texas or wherever they're coming from. And so that's when we wanted the transition house here in the Berkshires, which J.J. O'Connell's house has served as. And so that people could, a smaller number of people could stay in the area and become part of the Berkshire community for those people for whom that's appropriate. But many of our guests go back to their home communities, keeping Gould Farm as part of themselves down through the years. Often laugh because real estate's a big deal in Monterey. And what do you say in real estate? Location, location, location. At Gould Farm, we say connection, connection, connection. And that goes over many years. Right, Bob?
Sure does.
It does. Ongoing connection, and that's what I love when people who are struggle when they're here, they're not sure that Gould Farm has helped them much, they can't wait to go and get on with their lives. And then we hear from them years later, it was so important for me to be a part of Gould Farm. And that ongoing sense of connection beyond treatment to something that it becomes a real part of your life is the magic of what we do.
You've spoken of one of the ways in which I have seen Gould Farm evolve, and that we've been talking about it this evening. When I lived here, Gould Farm was a fairly closed community.
Mm-hmm.
People came while they were here, they were here. There was a transportation into town 2-3 times a week to pick up food. That was about the main connection. When Ray Ward came and ended up being the minister in Monterey, that was a big connection with Gould Farm. But when I walk in the dining room and over to the pantry on the side and look at all the activities that are going on out in the community, I think it's wonderful. And one of the thrusts of my interest in Gould Farm now is to try to help expand that kind of outreach and that kind of, because I think Gould Farm is a model community for how to connect with and relate with people in the world. And there's so much that the largest possible community can learn from this community.
We all need that, and people who struggle need it more, not less. And so often they're cut off from exactly what we all need. So
that's
intentionally creating it for them is so important. And that involves the children and the old people like us.
And the animals.
And the animals
And the
especially.
animals.
And
Oh,
nature, the woods, the trees, right, Bob?
Yeah, talk a little about that, yeah.
See, I've been reflecting a little, listening to different experiences of the farm, because we all have our different perceptions
Sure.
of what the farm is. And so it just has been a little insightful to me to listen, because my experience of the farm, I don't share what you were just saying about the kind of isolation and the specialness of the farm as a part, and it's probably
Good thing.
because of Ray Ward and the church,
Yeah.
because it's just almost simultaneous with my showing up here, I started attending the church here, and so even though there were other Gould farmers, like the Wittens and some others, there were townspeople as well, and the church has a long history of a relation with Gould Farm. So already my first experience of the farm was a larger community one of Gould Farm in Monterey, and it's never really been too separate. It's so, because I'm pretty integrated into the community with our neighbors and, you know, the Terriots, the Tryons, and so that was right from the beginning. So, and like Bob Terriot, you asked about Bob Terriot, his kids were largely, I mean, his adopted kids were largely at our place for lunch, you know, and his dog was over there as much as he was over at Bob's place. And remember Daisy, Tryon's dog, used to come down and spend the night in East House against the Gould Farm rules because of one of the guests loved Annette.
Yeah, loved Daisy,
Loved
that's
Daisy,
right.
and then you could see Daisy wandering back home for breakfast down Gould Road. So to me, it's always been kind of one. I haven't I wasn't imprinted with the idea of the separation of Gould Farm from the rest of the community too much. It was,
That's
I
a healthy
experienced it.
change as far
Yeah.
as
yeah, right, and I'm saying it's just different, because
Yeah.
I'm sure these things have evolved.
Yeah.
And I
one
can
of the
rem-
changes as well that's a little bit reflective is we talk about guests, and my understanding of the origin of the word guest is that there were the Goulds, the immediate family, the Goulds, and everyone was a guest. And some people view that as the glory days of Gould Farm, when there were the Goulds, and that's where the term came from. Everybody else was guests. It was an evolution to come to the place that people were started to be called staff, as separate from guests.
Yeah.
And that was, I don't know if there was a discrete line, so to speak, where that took place, but I think it was incremental. And it's just interesting that to the degree, I think, because we talk about community, but I think to the degree that that old ethic, or whatever you want to call it, paradigm or a model, is still in play, where we're just all individuals, and you make reference to the kids and the guests, and then that's a lot of the power of the place, is to give everybody like standing, in a sense, agency and validation. And I think that comes a lot from just sharing an equal status, so to speak.
I can remember stories of Harriet's saying, though, when it was really discouraged to mix with the church. And, Harriet telling about this era when, and it became, the community at one point became very staff-focused, or, family-focused, not the Goulds, but sort of between that initial era and then the more progressive, open era. There was a time where the farm was pretty closed, and the people were discouraged from going to church. They had services at the farm. And so I didn't experience that at all, thankfully, but there was that period of time, from what I understand, from the old stories. Yeah, I miss Harriet and her stories. I learned so much from her. She was blind, but she had so much insight. My favorite story about Harriet, though, is her coming down the stairs from one of the upper floors and bumping into one of the guests, and who felt so bad and said, "Oh, I'm so sorry, I forgot, that you were blind." And she had a banana in her hand, and she hit him with a banana and said, "I'm not blind, you're blind." And that was a story that I always remember about Harriet. She could see partially, but Harriet had worked as a stenographer in a courtroom. And then her parents worked at the farm, and she came and lived there, and then she taught Bill McKee and Janet when they were children. Bill McKee was born at the farm, and she was their teacher. They hired her like a private home school, and she taught them the first little while. And so Bill McKee, who just died very recently, was born at the farm and then kept in touch through many experiences all his life, and was on our board of directors. He really was an amazing man.
He wrote a history, like his mother
Yeah.
did, too.
Yeah, his mother wrote the first history, Rose McKee, called A Life of Sharing. And then called Brother Will. And then he followed up with A Life of Sharing. And then Steve Smith, who was Kent Smith's son, has written the latest book, and I can't quite say the title right now, but of stories about Gould Farm. So,
And Bill's grandson works at the farm.
yes,
5 generations.
yeah.
Can you say a little bit more about that?
Well, it's just that is an element of the farm that I've always appreciated, that I think it brings a certain continuity and richness to a place when you have a family line. In fact, I tease the 5th generation, who's in his 20s, I call him the Crown Prince, because it just kind of lends that direct line back to a much older time that I think is probably pretty rare in organizations, that you have that kind of continuity of so many generations running through the history of an organization. But I just appreciate that, all that history and that you see all over the farm, and some of maybe even the funky aspects of, we were looking at the trail today, and we were looking at some of the old bridges that need to be removed, and I'm always sad to see some of the older, the non-conforming and the not up to code. It's kind of sad in a way to see it go, but sometimes we just have to keep moving forward. But we have a lot of tradition, a lot of history.
Like our woodsheds are coming down now.
Yep.
We have a new sugar house. We talked something about building, Wayne mentioned the chip furnace, and Orchard House is new, and, but this is the newest building. It's a new woodshed and a new sugar house. And some people don't really like it where it is because it's a little further from Main House. You can't see it as well. But so that's a new experiment coming up this season.
I mean, it's been...
After all these years, we're going to be boiling sap in a different spot.
We'll hope it's a good year.
It's been a treasure having you come back on board from somewhat of an absence of some time.
Oh, yeah.
Because to hear about, like, the stories of your mom,
Yeah.
to me, I love those stories, to hear about how it used to be in the old days, and how she was the cook, and just how things worked back then when everybody pitched in. You had a wood stove, right?
Yeah.
Kitchen was the kitchen was in the current, where the current TV room is.
Nobody learns how to stack hay on the hay wagon anymore.
Yeah.
Because of the death of the hired man.
It took me 2 years to learn how to stack.
We have great, big, huge round bales now.
Yep. Took me 2 years. Dumb city kid.
Yeah.
And Bob volunteers on the farm, you know, once a week or so you show
Yeah.
up, and you've been doing it for a number of years, including collecting sap when the snow was close to 3 feet deep. Do you remember that by any chance?
Remember?
Collecting the sap?
Oh, you
when
bet.
When the snow was 3 feet deep?
Excuse me? Every time I got home, I had to take off my boots and turn them upside down.
Another person who lives in the community who really was important to Gould Farm at a crucial time is B.J. Johnson, who lives up near on Lake Buell. Is that right?
No.
Stevens Lake. And so he was on our board of directors, and then Gould Farm has periodically, through its 10 decades, gone through rough times, you know, transition in leadership or of all different, and we've only been here for 3 of those decades, so we haven't seen nearly all the drama. But I remember that BJ, just with a very open heart, stepped up at a time that was really crucial, and just was there, did a really great job. And so when he retired, I wrote a few short words for BJ from a woman of many words. In a world so full of words that whole political conventions are erected of them, higgledy-piggledy, without foundation, shakily standing until they don't, in a community so full of words that whole hours of days are spent in meetings, discourse, dialogues, and documenting, process, palaver, and pontification, one man sits more silently than not, choosing a few words to say from time to time, haltingly and humbly, then moving on with work that waits the doing. Thank you for walking the walk, BJ. So I thought I'd share that for BJ.
Good. Yep, it's been a lot of people, thousands of people been through the farm in one fashion or another, I suppose. Mm-hmm. We still have people that come back years later and have, like I had, who is it that planted the tree recently for one of their family members that hadn't been to the farm for years, that maple, the new maple out there.
Well, Pickens Miller.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And I did somebody I didn't even know. I've been there
Yeah.
26 years and I'd
Oh,
never
yeah.
even heard of the family. And they came back just to dedicate a tree to him.
Yeah, we used to call him Slim Pickens.
Julia Thomas, yes, she's very, very kind to the farm.
One of the things that used to happen in the summers when I was here was the population of the farm would double. Because people who had been here would come back for vacations. There were times, especially over Labor Day, July 4th, but again and again, when there were as many as 100 people eating in the dining room.
Yeah. James Adams was one of those who was a Harvard professor.
Yeah.
And he would come out summers and then Adams Cottage.
Sure.
You know, he
Yeah,
became one of the essential staff houses.
I remember.
Yeah.
We have youth groups, not so much these days, but up for many years, youth groups would come. And sometimes, 3 or 4 a year. And they'd stay in what was called the youth lodge. And they would help. Usually they were church groups.
Yeah.
Like Richard Lindgren would bring his church group, and it would work for a week.
And refugees, right?
Refugees, we had Vietnamese refugees, Can Van and Lai from, that Corey Loader brought over, and you weren't here when they were here.
No, but just after.
In the early 80s, and there are many, there's a whole history of refugees at Gould Farm.
We tried, the board brought it up after, when, in the Syrian crisis and so on, but it's gotten so complex and difficult. But we've had guests from Nigeria in the Ebola crisis who've done well with us, and a young man from Ireland who was with us, and this summer we had interns from Spain, and yeah, we love it when we can get an international
Germany.
sense. Yeah, lots of German volunteers, interns.
We had Japan, Manami Kodaka.
Yeah.
But the Mellolinis are responsible for the only A+ I ever got on a paper in college.
How was that?
Well, their son didn't speak a word of English. Erwin didn't speak a word of English when he came. I was taking a course in adolescent and child development, and we had to do a study. So I decided I watched him, and he would play by himself, nobody else. He would go out, he would draw a whole town on the dirt driveway in back of main house. And I wrote a paper about how he entertained himself, how he found his way to live and learn. And the teacher said, I'd never read a paper like that before. He gave me an A+ on it.
You remember that one?
And then he marked it down to a B because it was late. I said, it's okay. I was late because I had to come home one weekend so I could watch just what he was doing and write the paper. And by the time I got it, anyway, but he did that.
I think he's retired now.
What's that?
I think he's retired now.
Yeah, I met
Is
him.
he?
He's running a lab for Harvard.
Oh, yeah.
For Harvard for years.
Really?
Yeah.
He moved to Bernardstown, Massachusetts. And I met him, was it at a funeral? Oh, Stephen Gross.
Oh,
He
yeah.
was at that funeral,
He was at that funeral.
yeah.
In 1943, a refugee family came from France. Fred and Lucy Lancome.
Oh, yes.
Yeah.
the Lancome.
Restaurant.
To Belgium, actually.
Yep.
He was a sculptor.
They lived at Gould Farm until they could establish a Monterey.
Yeah, that's right.
Their house in Monterey, Sunnyside. That lovely little French restaurant, which was also his gallery.
Yeah.
We have one of his bronze sculptures. Most, of course, sculptures, were these gorgeous wood sculptures. we couldn't afford. But we were very good friends for a long time with the Lancombs and their son Claude.
And the photographer, Lucian Eigner, had close ties to
Oh.
Mrs. Gould.
Oh, yeah.
And he took, he had many famous pictures, but the picture of Mrs. Gould sitting at her desk
Oh,
with the
that's wonderful.
inkwell, and we still have the inkwell. That's a Lucian Eigner classic, yes, it's in the archives.
Yeah.
And when we do exhibits,
Sure.
we always have the
Yeah,
inkwell.
he's a classic. They were, I was in awe of all those
Yeah.
people. But they were people.
Yeah. And so now the newest story is, we've just had an interview, and we have the story in Oprah magazine. So it came out just this month, it's just out, and I've already gotten my first phone call. I'm among the many thousands who must have read about Gould Farm in Oprah magazine. And a woman called about her son. And it might be that he'll come to Gould Farm, but you never know.
You never know.
How did that happen?
Well, they heard about Gould Farm, and it was through a connection Flavio and Lisa, that's right. And Lisa knew someone who knew a copywriter or some connection, and so.
Well, Lisa had a good friend. Lisa and Flavio, who now run the Six Depot in West Stockbridge, lived and worked at the farm for 10 years. He's a restaurateur and had come up from New York City with the idea of opening a restaurant up here. They bought a place in Sheffield. And because their kids played hockey with our clinicians' kids of the time, they heard about Gould Farm, and one thing led to another, and they realized they really would like to live in a more rural setting and with their children on a farm. And Flavio came, and they fell in love with the place. Flavio took over as the kitchen manager, did a great job for 10 years. I would say a great natural therapist.
Yes, he was
And,
so good.
I tease him about only seeing him rolling his eye one time in 10 years. But then Lisa, who is in marketing and graphic arts, is her background. She is a good friend of somebody who works at Oprah magazine. And so through that connection, they sent somebody up to do a story. Took a couple years, but eventually happened.
Not too long.
Now
Yeah.
the stories just come out.
And the roadside store was in Bon Appetit, 15 years ago, or 10 years ago?
10 years ago,
And it
probably.
almost ruined the store, because so many people came there.
This may be something are you prepared for what's going to happen with Oprah magazine?
We're always prepared.
We'll see.
Again, we're who we are at base: kindness, courtesy, respect, open hearts, hard work to do, and we don't try to serve everyone. We know that it takes real buy-in to be a part of what Gould Farm is, and we hope that we can serve those people who have the potential to see themselves, know their place in the world with their vulnerabilities, and not be defined by the mental illness, but be able to identify what their strengths are as well as what their vulnerabilities are. And everybody's giving every day, and everybody's receiving. I gain so much from the guests every day.
An Oprah article can't be much worse than a chicken house fire.
Maybe, we'll see.
That's an interesting way to end that. Oprah magazine can't be even worse than the chicken house fire. Thank you, Steve, that was perfect.
Are we done?
Thank you.
Thank you very much. I feel
What a
very
job you're
privileged
doing.
to be at the table with you.
Now, why don't you just go to the farm and stay there, and then,
How many of these sessions have you done?
Probably have well over 28 hours of
Really?
interviews.
From, I mean, how many different subjects? I know you did the Drevi car, you did the Bidwell House interns.
We did the Bidwell interns, we did the gravity car races, we did the Woodburn Farm Boys,
Oh, yeah,
best night ever.
yeah.
We did summer camp stories,
Oh,
people who
good.
went to summer camps here. And then we have a lot of individual interviews. Leonard Weber, who's now 98.
Yeah,
Dick Tryon and Barbara Tryon. We have tons of, and then we have a lot of people like Delight Dodick and her brother Terry Wynn. Georgiana. I'm trying to think, it's adding up. Adding up to a lot of people.
so do you have a list of targets?
Yeah,